Dear Richard, I'm writing to you. Is it Dear Richard? I guess it would be Sir Richard. Dear Sir Richard Branson. No, that sounds a bit stuffy because I feel like I know you, Richard. You've been in the news all my life with your teeth and your jumpers, so... Dear Rick. Ricky? No. Dick. Dear Dick. I'm writing to you to explain firsthand what happened to me when I boarded the 10:15 Virgin train from Manchester Piccadilly to London Euston. You see, it was marred by an incident. Well, incident is probably a bit underpowered. It was a skirmish, really. Yeah, that's a skirmish. A situation that embroiled me. No, it was worse than that. I got arrested. Richard. The day started badly for me, right, because I was crushingly hungover. And the 10:15, that's an early start for someone like myself, so I found myself on the train without tea, and I have to have tea when I'm hungover. So as soon as I boarded, I was immediately in the buffet car demanding tea. And the man poured a cup and put it on the counter, and then he got a paper bag and put it next to it. And then he got a little white plastic lid and put it on the cup. But it popped off immediately. It was too small. He tried another one. He had a whole elephant trunk's worth of lids behind him. He tried that, but that popped off as well. Of course it did. Idiot. If they fit each other... Maybe try 2 or 3 before you go, we've got the wrong lids. This geometric chump tried 8 or 9 before finally conceding, we've got the wrong lids. I said to him, it's okay, mate, I don't actually want the lids or the bag. I just want the tea. And he said, oh, you can't have the tea without the lid and the bag. Health and safety. I said to the bloke, so are you telling me that I could take the lid and the bag, but not the tea? And he looked confused and then went, yeah. So I said, right. And in a misplaced fit of self-righteousness, I put the lid in the bag and stormed off down the train. I sat down at this table, right, and I was quickly surrounded by these women, Manchester women of a certain age, Mancunian golden girls. They had a glint in their eye that suggested they'd either divorced their husbands or buried them. And they were off to Paris, and the carriage quickly filled up with a loud conversation about how they're going to need a centralised pot of money, some communal funds, to look after such things as bus fares, taxi rides, and, should today turn out like last year, bail. So the chief golden girl turned to me and said, yeah, have you finished with that bag, mate? So I said, yeah. I don't really need it, I was just trying to prove a point. And I gave her the bag, and they all put €40 in. It was quickly dubbed the Paris Kitty. And then an argument broke out. Who was going to be the guardian of the kitty? No one wanted responsibility. The first one said, oh, you know me, I'll just forget it. The second one says, oh, I always get mugged. The third, oh, I do nick things. So they all opted out. So I said, hey, ladies, the safest thing you can do here is split it evenly amongst yourselves. And then they started playing that game, it's a very British game, the don't say yes or be positive about anything game. The one where you're not allowed to express joy. Affirmation has to be done by framing it as a negative and then inverting it. And then one said, hey, Barbara, did you get the snow, Barbara? And Barbara went, oof, not half. Not half, therefore whole. That's how the game works. And she said, did you enjoy the snow, Barbara? And Barbara went, well, it was good to get it out of the way. Good to get out of the way, this is snow, not chicken pox. We don't have a quota where you can go, finally, am I glad to see the back of that. This is weather, isn't it? Weather. Weather is a never-ending loop, a consistent cycle that feeds into itself and regurgitates and goes on and on and on, like eating pistachio nuts. How's that same... No, because the time it takes to chew and swallow a pistachio nut is exactly the same amount of time it takes to open the next one. Plunging us into a cycle of addiction that makes crack cocaine look like wine gums. I couldn't handle them, right? Not on a hangover, not without tea. So I changed carriages. And I went into another carriage that was empty, apart from one old dear who was sat across the aisle. She was sat alone, dignified, fully dressed. I don't mean I was waltzing about in my underwear. I mean, she was still wearing a big, thick, beige granny coat. And on her lap sat a big, thick, beige granny bag. there were none of the trappings of modern transit. There was no laptop, no iPhone, no DVD. It was just a packet of mints and a head full of memories. That's how old people travel, isn't it? And more power to them, I say. I think it's to do with the percentage of time that you've been alive. Because if you think about it, if you're 80 years old, a 2-hour train journey is nothing. You might think, well, I'm not even going to take my coat off for this. So I slumped over the table and fell asleep. And I was awoken shortly after that by the train manager who came bumbling in. Now, the train manager, he's the villain in all of this. He's the antagonist. He's the jobsworth that got me arrested. And interestingly, Virgin have a slogan. It's part of their DNA, a pillar of ethos on which the company was built. And that is, we must exceed expectation. We must exceed expectation. And I've got to be honest, when I first saw the train manager, when I first saw this buck-toothed, overweight, Neanderthalic killjoy waddling down the platform, my very first thought was, hello. I expect this guy's a bit of a bell end. He exceeded my expectations. Such was his mass, he couldn't actually fit through the train doors the normal way, or sideways. So he developed this sort of shimmy, like a lava lamp. He looked like he wasn't going to make it at first. He was a geometric genius. He came in and he said, tickets and passes ready for inspection, please. And he had a suspicious white stain on his upper inner thigh. No, it could have been yoghurt, could have been mayonnaise, but in order to demonise him, let's assume it was semen. Tickets and passes ready. Worse than that was he had a name badge on a jaunty angle that drooped off his lapel, and he was called Stuart, but he spelt it the weird way. He spelt it A-D-O-L-F. Tickets and passes. Worse than that was the way he cradled his ticket machine against his crotch, like the cock extension it clearly was. Tickets and passes ready for inspection, please. Now and again, he'd jerk this phallic misery, and it would ejaculate an orange ticket of death at some point. The whole thing was absolutely odious. Oh, tickets and passes ready for inspection, please. And he went over to the old woman. Now, the old woman is called Lena. And he went over there, and there was a problem. Because Lena had got an itinerary that told her to get the 10:15, which we were on. But her little orange rectangular ticket said get the 10:45. It was a small mistake that the ticket clerk had made in the office. You know, he'd have thought anyone would have overlooked such a minor issue. Not eagle-eyed Hitler. I remember hearing him go, oh, no, love, no, you've got the wrong ticket there, love. You're on the wrong train, I'm afraid, love. No, it's invalid. I mean, there's nothing I can do, love. There's nothing I can do. Well, if there's nothing you can do, why don't you just do nothing? And walk on. Surely you dangling your ticket todger into a granny's face is harassment, isn't it? Oh, there's nothing I can do. There's nothing I can do, love. No, you need to buy a new ticket, I'm afraid, love. Your ticket's invalid. You need to buy a new ticket, love. It's £115, love. Exactly. I went, what? An invisible force dragged me out of my seat. I went from hungover stoner to argumentative politician like that. What? £115? To stay on the train? Are you out of your stout mind? Have you taken leave of your portly senses? Let's just look closely at the situation, shall we? An old woman has got a bit confused and she's boarded the train half an hour before she should have done because of a mistake that wasn't even hers. And you're making her pay £115 to stay on it? Let's look at more facts, shall we? This train is 10 minutes behind schedule. If we keep losing ground, she'll be on the right train. Which would mean we're all on the wrong train. Then what are you going to do? Are you going to come and torment us with your phallic misery? No, you're not, are you? Because you were probably bullied at school, and now you're getting back at the world by pulling up that uniform and attacking the weak. Well, that's what I wanted to say. Regrettably, what I said was, oh, that's a bit harsh. And he turned to me and said, what's it got to do with you? What's it got to do with me? I like grannies. I like grannies. You know, I find them a harmless race. They smell a bit weird, but they teach about the olden days. They show you how to make stuff last. They offer refreshingly bigoted opinions. Grannies just stand for cooking, knitting and everything good before they forget your name, forget their own name, forget everything and leave behind a packet of mints, a head full of memories and an empty winged armchair. And with that he went, "Oh, Pete Fair," and he shot a £115 load all over his fat fingers. I said, "You are a disgrace to the once noble art of train guarding." Which I know it's a lovely sentence. I thought, I've got him here, you know, following the, that's a bit harsh. Let myself down there. I've got him on the ropes. But before I could do anything, Lena piped up and went, "It's okay, love, we mustn't grumble." And Lena pulled out £120 in tightly rolled money. And you only tightly roll money if the money's special. And to Lena, it was special because she'd saved up her pension and this money was to buy her grandchildren Christmas presents with. It's not very often that Lena gets a visit, so Granny was keen to mark the occasion by buying a brand new Xbox game, a massive bar of chocolate and enough lemonade to fill a bath. And all this now lay in tatters because of shitbag Satanic Stuart and his satanic schlong who had swiped to £120 savings and replaced it with a shiny new ticket, a crumpled fiver and enough tears to fill a bath. Which now rolled down Lena's face and bounced off her big beige granny bag. I mean, £115. What's it got to do with you? Train travel has got to be cheaper than the car. That is such a marketing cornerstone that if you fail at that, you shouldn't run a railway. I mean, for £115, I could have driven to London in second gear. I could have reversed down the M6, pushing a caravan with a sailing boat on the roof rack, aircon full blast, driven by Glasgow, and if anyone said, "Tom, what are you doing?" I could have honestly replied, "I'm actually saving money." £115. What's it got to do with you? I thought, right, I'm going to get Lena's money back. That's going to be my mission for the rest of the journey. I'm going to get Lena's money back. And I remember I read somewhere that if the train is delayed by a sufficient amount of time, we all get a refund. So I thought, right, I'm going to get the train delayed. I know I'm going to smash the glass with the toffee hammer. We've all wanted to do that. What's it got to do with you? I'll show you what it's got to do with me. The problem is, the smashy glassy alarm thing came with a penalty of misuse of £150. And that would have resulted in a net loss. And then, one of the Golden Girls waddled past, right, going for a piss. Classy ladies. And I thought, hang on a minute, that's what we'll do. We'll do what the Golden Girls did. We'll have a whip round. If we have a whip round, we can raise £115, no problem, right? So I went to the buffet car, got another paper bag, and commenced whip round. I went into every carriage and I told everyone about the itinerary and the ticket and the nasty man and Lena, and I asked for £1 off everybody, just £1, right? And it was really successful. The bag was filling up, really positive. I got applauded out of the first two carriages, and then in the third carriage, I got heckled. Heckled for having a whip round. I've never been more embarrassed in my life. What was interesting was I was just a bloke on a train having a whip round. This was just a drunk heckling the bloke on a train having a whip round. What the drunk didn't realise is that the bloke does stand up most nights. He's quite good with the old hecklers, you see, so the drunk shouts, "Hey, Sideshow Bob! What are you having a whip round for? Haircut?" I said, "No, time machine. I'm going back to get you aborted." Uncompromising. The carriage erupted, right? It was possibly the best gig I've ever had. I was collecting £1 for the whip round here and selling tickets for future shows here. £1, please. Leeds on the 19th. £1, please. Liverpool on the 27th. One woman didn't agree with the whip round but wanted to buy a ticket. And I got £105 in £1 coins, right? The bag was really heavy. And I took it back to Lena and I said, "Lena, this is from everybody on the train. I want you to..." No, I didn't know her name at this point, actually. So I said, "Old woman, this is from everybody on the train. I want you to put it away out of sight." And she put it into a big beige granny bag. It gobbled it up, no problem. It just went, "Whoa, whoa." This thing was massive. It had pram wheels on it. And she started crying again. Old woman. I finally crashed to sleep. I was still hungover, and I'd still not had any tea. And then, just like the first time, I was awoken. But this time by a laptop being nudged into my forearms. And You know when you wake up in public and you didn't even know that you were asleep? The sort of confusion that reigns. And I do what you always do in this situation, where you try and imagine a 50% line on the train table. And yes, that grain of wood there, that's 50%, please. And the owner of the laptop had sat opposite me. He was a very wealthy businessman that had a healthy glow of someone who was successful in his chosen field, right? And Lena started telling the businessman all about the ticket and the itinerary and the nasty man and the whip man. And the businessman was really interested. And he turned to me and said, "How much money did you raise then?" And I said, £105. And he turned to Lena and said, "And how much was the ticket?" £115, said Lena. And the businessman opened up a thick, expensive-looking woolen overcoat and pulled out a tenner. And he gave it to Lena, and we'd done it. We'd raised £115. We'd righted the wrong. It was a wonderful moment, right? Because I love trains, right? I adore trains. I mean, I'm not a train spotter. That's a step of eccentricity too far. Well, I say I'm not a train spotter. I was at Crewe Station twice in a week recently, and I saw the same train spotters on both occasions. And it dawned on me I was spotting the train spotter. And that's got to be worse, hasn't it, to sit there going, bushy beard, green anorak, tick. 1,000-yard stare, dubious sexual history. Tick. I was regaling Lena and the unnamed businessman with this hilarious anecdote when who should come waddling back down the carriage but Stuart. Stuart come back in, didn't he, going, "You've been begging." That was his opening gambit to me. "You've been begging." His phallic misery was now twitching in anticipation. "You've been begging." I said, "No, I haven't." He went, "Yeah, I've got you on CCTV. Begging." I said, "Honestly, Stuart, I wasn't begging." He said, "Well, why were you talking to the other passengers then?" I said, "What's it got to do with you?" He said, "You've been begging and I'm going to get you arrested at the next stop." Now, I like to think he phoned ahead and went, "Houston, we have a problem." But we're dealing with someone who sleeps under a swastika duvet. I don't think he appreciates natty wordplay. And it's an amazing feeling, right? To be on a train that's hurtling towards London where the authorities are waiting to arrest you. That's incredible, because when you think about it, that's the opposite to a traditional police chase. Normally, the criminals run away and are pursued by the police. Here, I was on a fixed rail. They just waited on the platform with a net. £115, that is the price of a peak time ticket from Manchester to London. And they say peak time, it's actually an anytime ticket, you see, because of course if you pay £115 you can get any train. I mean, you should be allowed to keep the seat. But it's called an anytime ticket. But if you get an off-peak train, the ticket is £65 if you buy it at the station. But when you're actually on the train, the only ticket you can buy is an anytime ticket, a ticket for any train. So when you're actually on the train, the only ticket you can buy is for any train. I don't need that luxury of choice. I'm here. I'm on it. It's off peak. And train managers are on commission. Isn't that awful? They're actually on 2.5% commission. Oh, I mean, doesn't that make you sick? I don't know what offends me more, the notion that that concept exists or the fact it's so paltry and they still act like jobsworths. I'd love to be on the train and him say, "You're going to have to buy a new ticket, it's £100, because I'd say, "Look, mate, I know you'll get £2.50 of this. How's £3 sound?" On the hip, no questions. As the train pulled into Euston, we didn't discuss this, but me, Lena, and the unnamed businessman, we stuck together as a show of solidarity, a display of unity. It was quite nice. And we walked down the platform in a V formation. Just felt right. I took the lead. I had Lena on one arm and the unnamed businessman on the other. And Lena was being awful slow. I found myself dragging her in places. Come on, Lena. Come on, Lena. I thought it was the adrenaline of the forthcoming arrest. With hindsight, she was weighed down with 105 £1 bills. It's amazing what you forget in the heat of the moment. And we got to the end, and sure enough, 3 policemen were waiting, right? So I approached them, and I offered them both wrists. I thought this was the best way to break the ice, you know. I thought a handshake would have been too formal. A high five, cocky. So I offer both wrists, and I say, "I'm the beggar. I'm here to be arrested." And the policeman said, "You're the beggar? If you're the beggar, who's he then?" talking about the unnamed mature businessman. And this was a really interesting moment because if you think about it, whoever you're with, you know your relationship to that person. You could be friends, lovers, work colleagues, brothers, it doesn't matter. But unless there's a bombshell in the pipeline or one of you's tragically disillusioned, everyone knows the status of their personal relationships. But I'd only met this guy 50 minutes ago. All we talked about was jobsworths, the definition of begging, and why there should be a 50% line drawn on train tables. We'd not actually got pissed and gone, I love you, Steve. So when the policeman said, who's he then? I caught myself going, yeah, who are you? And what he did was so cool, right? For the second time that day, he opened up his thick, expensive-looking woolen overcoat. And this time he pulled out a business card. And he gave it to the policeman, and he said, I am his friend and advisor. And the business card said lawyer on it. The policeman audibly shat himself. And quite rightly so, because how good a beggar would you have to be to prop up not only yourself, but clearly a very expensive legal eagle in tow, just in case something gets into trouble. You got a spare 20 quid, mate? This bastard charges by the hour. Some handcuffs were clunked around my wrists as a policeman said, I did not expect you to have a lawyer with you. I said, it's Virgin Trains, mate, they exceed expectations. Just then, an angry mob of fellow rail passengers had gathered down the platform. I said, Sarge, they're going to stampede us, Sarge, do something. Just then, Stuart slopped onto the platform. He went, oh! I'll see you arrested the beggar then. I'll see you arrested the beggar. And they all turned and charged towards Stuart, pinning him up against the train. I said, Sarge, they're going to kill him, Sarge. They're going to tie him limb from limb, Sarge. Do something, Sarge. Before anyone could react, Stuart ran at them. Ran at them. I thought he'd gone mad. He knew what he was doing. He'd worked on the trains for years, dodging through train doorways. He dodged and moved past everyone. Hands, fists and feet were flying, shimmying like a lava lamp, dodged and moved. One man shaped up to charge him and he fired off a round of tickets. Brrrah! Brrrah! His ticket machine was now like a sawn-off lance and he was jousting people out of the way. He was sprinting down the platform. He looked like he was just going to carry on to Manchester and get away with it, but one of the golden girls was still walking down the platform. The angry mob shouts, stop him! And the golden girl threw something. It looked like a ninja star. I mean, they were rough women, but you didn't expect them to be armed. She threw something and it hit Stuart on the knee. And his ticket machine got tangled between his fat kebab legs. And his ticket machine, the symbol of power he'd once abused so badly, was now the very reason the platform was spiralling up to meet his fat face. He bounced twice off the concrete. The angry mob went, woo! One policeman went to arrest the golden girl, the other policeman helped Stuart, and we all got sent to the police station. On the way, I sidle up to the golden girl and I say, excuse me, what did you chuck? And she said, oh, it was nothing. It was nothing. It was just something I found in the kitty. You know, it was one of those little white plastic lids. And when we get to the police station, the desk sergeant is reading our statements and he's getting really angry. He's going, oh, don't agree with that. Oh, no, I don't know why I do this job sometimes. He's getting really annoyed. And I'm saying, calm down, Sarge, you know. And I'm thinking, what on earth is happening? All I wanted was a cup of tea. And now I'm counselling a copper. He said, calm down, you know, you'll have better days, Sarge. Just relax, Sarge. I mean, you've got Millwall at home soon, Sarge. You can take your frustrations out there, Sarge. And he said, no, you don't understand, because I've worked hard through the ranks at this job. And now they expect me to arrest people like you, when all I can see has happened is he made her pay too much money, so you had a whip round. Nobody was under duress. Everybody paid freely. So, really, you should all be at liberty to get on with your day, because as a policeman, I've got to ask myself, what's it got to do with me? And he crumpled up my statement and chucked it in the bin. Then he turned to the golden girl and said, why are you even here? Before she could answer, Stuart butted in and said, because she threw a white plastic lid. Hit me on the knee. I believe it's called assault. The policeman turned to Stuart in the way that a hawk might turn to a mouse. And the policeman said, look, Stuart, I don't like liars. I've just spoken to the manager of the buffet car, And apparently on that service, due to a health and safety problem, there were no hot drinks served. There's no way she was in possession of a white plastic bag. And with that, we were swept out of the station. Victory was ours. And my whole argument with Virgin was, that if you're on an off-peak train, let us buy an off-peak ticket. We do not have to tolerate public transport extortion. No matter how officious the Jobsworth, no matter how faceless the organisation, or how regal-looking the uniform, we can make a stand, because people have an inbuilt sense of what's right and wrong, and we will reach out to help others. We need to break their laws of management stupidity with our laws of common decency. They can try and brainwash us into thinking we're powerless, don't get involved, fill in a feedback form, your call is held in a queue, there's nothing you can do. But from now on, bureaucratic red tape will not hold us back, because when we, the general public, your paymasters, rise up, join forces and attack, we will flatten you quicker than a plastic lid under a train. And then I got a letter from Virgin announcing the whole episode had highlighted a problem with their ticketing policy, and they are to introduce a new law. So I called Virgin and I spoke to this lady and I said, what's the new law going to be called? You've got to give it a name, haven't you? And modern laws are normally named after the protagonist of the story. I said, you need to name the law after the real hero of the story. So now, if you are on an off-peak Virgin train, you can buy an off-peak ticket because of Lena's law. So, Richard, Ricky, Dick, that's what happened. And I'm delighted that Virgin have introduced Lena's law. But ideally, every train operator should adopt it, and we can make this peak time open single rip-off a thing of the past. Yours sincerely, Tom Wrigglesworth.
An open return letter to Richard Branson was written and performed by Tom Wrigglesworth. The producer was Simon Mayhew Archer.
Dear Sir Philip Hammond, my name is Tom Wrigglesworth. I'm a comedian. No, wait, you won't take me seriously. What sounds sensible? I'm a live reproducer of the amusing verse. No, that sounds ridiculous. I'm an engineer of mirth. Yes, a mirth engineer. That sounds suitably respectable. You are Philip Hammond, the Secretary of State for Transport. At least at the time of writing you are. I'm posting this letter first class to ensure it arrives before the next inevitable cabinet reshuffle. I'm writing this open letter to ask one very simple question. What is going on with traffic wardens? It seems to me that when asked for their opinion on traffic wardens, people fall into two quite distinct groups. Half the people say things like, traffic wardens, eh? I tell you what, I would love to be given 5 minutes alone, a length of lead pipe and written assurance that no one would press charges. Whereas the other half, they say things like they will wish traffic wardens would be held in a locked room, given a bottle of whiskey, a service revolver and a newfound sense of decency. It really is a topic that divides the nation. But who's really to blame? If traffic wardens were employed to solely keep the traffic moving and stop people parking like dicks, then I think we'd all have a bit more sympathy. But when you witness blatant bullying, abuses of power, and an attitude to rule so inflexible it would have Joseph Stalin going, come on lads, lighten up. It's hard not to want to beat them to death with their own one-piece triangle wheel clamp. Parking wardens appeared in the 1960s and have been around ever since. No one really wanted them, but they emerged, and now we can't get rid of them. Rather like hippies. Concrete architecture. Or Sir Cliff Richard. Originally, traffic wardens were part of the police force. Not with the same rank and power, of course, but they would have all headed down to the same lodge at Christmas to enjoy mince pies, mulled wine, and the work of a racist comedian. But then, the Road Traffic Act of 1991 brought about the era of decriminalised parking enforcement, which sounds cool. Calling it decriminalised makes it sound rebellious, like smoking drugs, as if the message was, tune in, turn on, drop out, but do mind where you're parked. In reality, decriminalised parking enforcement simply meant that traffic monitoring could be contracted out to private companies for profit. And where there's profit to be made, pesky little irritants like fairness go out of the window. I was unlucky enough to receive a parking ticket when I had to drive into Soho, an area of London that's quite unique. Unique in its bid to hamper the motorist and trap you in a labyrinth of Chinese restaurants, eat in or take away, and sex shops, eat in or take away. So in Soho, I saw a bay and parallel parked into a space that was only just big enough. It was a sort of manoeuvre that makes you proud. I stopped and showed passers-by. They applauded. It was a cracking piece of parking. Autographs were requested. Builders whistled. A lady gave me flowers. The mayor declared a public holiday. I was briefly considered as the face of the new £20 note. Not replacing Faraday either. No, replacing the Queen. As I say, it was a very small space. Now, a large white van had vastly encroached over the line into what I was claiming as my bay. The van itself seemed ripe for a ticket, because, as we know, parking wardens can spot a 1 millimetre contravention from 50 yards. In fact, the gold-mouth technology row that rumbles on in the world of football would be solved immediately if they just employed traffic wardens instead of linesmen. So there I was in Soho, and because of this thick white man and his badly parked thick white van, my rear end was protruding 2 inches over the back line. And, predictably enough, when I came back to the car, I did of course find a big fat penalty charge notice. The roller coaster of emotions you go through when you see a parking ticket is epic. You go through the 5 stages of grief. First, you get the denial. No, I can't have a ticket. It must be a flyer for a nearby nightclub, or a large, perfectly square leaf with a yellow and black checkered edging must have flown onto my windscreen. Stage 2 is, of course, anger. This is when you realise that it is a parking ticket, and oh God, no, you feel such a wave of hatred that you're left with a sinking feeling that, regrettably, you're going to have to kill a man. Or at the very least, apply a headlock. Stage 3 is bargaining, and the parking authorities are ready for this. They're perfectly familiar with the Kubler-Ross grief model. It's the first thing you learn as a traffic warden, after a cocky swagger and a love of oversized green jackets. So they start the bargaining phase for you. The charge is £80, but if you pay within 14 days, it's £40. Somehow making you think you're getting a bargain. Oh, Ambassador, only half the arbitrary amount you'll want to bleed out of me. Why? With this generosity, you're spoiling us. Stage 4 is, of course, depression. Depression about the fact that you parking 2 inches over a line is going to cost you £80. That works out at £40 an inch. £40 an inch. I get emails every day telling me I can increase my manhood for considerably less than that. Stage 5 is, of course, acceptance. When we accept that parking wardens are the peddlers of such vicious and unwarranted attacks that Rottweilers have considered keeping them as pets. So, stages of grief complete, and you find yourself stung by the checkered wasp of the penalty charge notice. Of course, you write to the authorities, explaining yourself. You tend to write 2 letters. The first might be described as cathartic or painfully knee-jerk. In it, you outline the gruesome details about what grisly end should befall their nasty parking Nazis. Having calmed down, you reread it and realise that if you did send it, you could be charged with a hate crime. So, you write the second letter, this time full of apologies, humility and acceptance. Basically, a begging letter. After I queried my ticket in Soho, they wrote back and explained that I was categorically in the incorrect bay. The signage was totally clear, the enclosed photographs proved their point beyond doubt. Even OJ's lawyer couldn't have cast doubt on this footage. I was in the wrong place. £80 fine for being in the wrong place. But it was only when I replied that I noticed their address. I was writing to Westminster Parking Services, who were based in Warrington. Unbelievable! Are they on the receiving end of such a violent torrent of hate mail that the minimal safe distance for them to operate is 160 miles from the scene of the crime? Hang on a minute. Westminster Parking Services, based in Warrington, accusing me of being in the wrong place? So who looks after the parking problem in Warrington? One wonders. Someone in Penzance, who in turn sends their correspondence to an office in Grimsby. It's as stupid as finding out Santa Claus has a grotto in Florida. Or that the BNP headquarters have been outsourced to Mumbai. It's simple, of course, to demonise and attack traffic wardens. That's not a reason not to do it. I know it's not the easiest job in the world, but, for example, I live opposite a school. Every day at 3:30, their mums come and pick them up. And they park anywhere. Any bloody where. Cars parked all over the verge, cars left on the pavement. It's like something out of 28 Days Later. While opposite, there's a depot of traffic wardens. That's the collective noun, by the way. Singularly, they're despots. Plurally, they're depots. But they never come out to deal with the chaos. Why incur the wrath of 30 overprotected mothers when you can go and catch people 2 inches over a line who aren't even in the vehicle? 2 inches! Unbelievable. This really does make me think that rather than keep the traffic flowing, they're only interested in targeting people to make money. So, partly in order to spice up their day, partly out of curiosity, and mainly in order to make a radio programme, I decided to test my theory. I wondered what would happen if they received a letter about a totally invented incident where, rather than protesting my innocence, I gave a full and frank admission of guilt. Amid all the complaints and excuses they get, I would be the one person singing like a canary. So I wrote to every London borough. Well, I didn't write. I forced my 94-year-old registered blind grandmother to write for me. This is the letter we sent, in which poor old Granny Mabel confesses to a heinous crime.
To whom it may concern, 2 Saturdays ago, I travelled by car to attend a christening in your borough and paid for 2 hours of on-street parking. I'm afraid during the christening I lost all track of time and only remembered my parking situation halfway through a comical yarn told by my niece about bicycles, highlighting the dangers of a crossbar when one is used to a step-through frame. When I did reach my car, I realised that my parking voucher had expired a whopping 44 minutes previously. I should point out that I would have only been 40 minutes late, but due to the prevailing headwind, I was forced to spend a further 4 minutes chasing my hat. Nevertheless, there was no penalty notice affixed to my windscreen. I searched fruitlessly for a traffic warden for 15 minutes, by which time my husband Arthur, who doesn't travel well, was begging that we return to Sheffield as soon as possible, in order to avoid both the forecast downpour and the Birmingham rush. My husband theorised that using modern know-how like Google or the internet, you would be able to track us down and reissue the parking notice. Arthur freely admits that his actions at this point make him an accessory to my terrible crime. 2.5 weeks have since passed and we are struggling to live with the ever-mounting guilt. Only this morning, Arthur failed to finish his egg. In order to bring this to a swift conclusion, please issue me with a penalty charge notice, if only for the sake of Arthur. He is, by nature, a nervous man and would, I fear, not flourish in a prison environment, with its culture of punks in the bunk and shanking. Until you issue the parking ticket, we will continue to live in purgatory. Yours sincerely, Mabel Bradley.
Now, you would have hoped that most councils would have pitied the babbling granny. But sadly, not. Instead, my Granny Mabel became stuck in a relentless bout of correspondence. Not one council said, "Don't worry, calm down, forget about it, finish your egg." The boroughs kept writing back, asking for the PCN number and threatening to increase fines if she didn't comply. But there was no PCN number. There was no offence. My granny hasn't been to London since they built the M1. But what what my granny had shown was that the system is so dehumanised, so profit-orientated, that there is no room for sympathy. It's like trying to reason with a cross between a one-armed bandit and a Dalek. Now, parking tickets are bad enough. They may spoil your day, but most of us accept them as a sort of git tax and move on. But the authorities, they realised that our acceptance of parking tickets meant that we didn't fear them anymore. So, in 1995, they upped the ante and introduced the wheel clamp. Yes, the wheel clamp, a fine example of totally perverse thinking. If something is parked where it shouldn't be, simply stop it from moving anywhere. It's like catching a burglar and punishing him by forcing him to live in your house. Now, I've never been clamped myself, but my friend James has. So let me take you back to May 2008. Usain Bolt had just set a new world record. Boris Johnson had just been elected Mayor of London. And we had all just vowed to take voting more seriously in future. Meanwhile, in Berkshire, James and his girlfriend, en route to the cinema, had parked in a quiet residential street. But little did they know that this was no ordinary street. This was a private road. Now, as far as I'm concerned, private roads are the snobby status symbol for people who aren't satisfied with automatic garage doors and a recycling bin full of used opera tickets. Every lawn was bowling green lush, every tree was sculpted to perfection, and every bush trimmed to the point where it would make a Brazilian look unkempt. Every bush except for one. One bush was overgrown. The bush hiding the sign that said, "This is a private road. Unauthorised vehicles will be clamped." So, James and his girlfriend arrived back from the cinema to find the car clamped. The old Denver boots gripping their wheel like Naomi Campbell's fingers round the throat of a PA. James was more than a little shocked, but he finally found the sign hidden by the overgrown bush and saw that there was a £60 release fee and a number to call. James called it and got through to a guy called Butcher, the company boss, the chief operating meathead. A man who looked, well, if you can picture a wheel clamper, it's him. Shaven-headed, wearing a bomber jacket, and with a fixed, glazed look in his eyes which seemed to focus about 10 yards behind what he was actually looking at. Like a cross between a Vietnam War veteran and a particularly violent goldfish. So, there was James on the phone to Butcher. Initially, communication was difficult. "It's a bad line," said James. "I'll call you back." When he called back, the line was considerably clearer, as Butcher was now holding the receiver the correct way round. Now, knowing that he was in the wrong, James quickly agreed to pay the £60 release fee. And the law states that upon agreeing to pay, the clampers must come and release the vehicle immediately. But, for reasons that are clear only to his own beef and gristle brain, Butcher insisted James tell him his home address. Although they were technically entering a business contract, James didn't exactly imagine the relationship blossoming to the point where Butcher would just pop round unannounced with chocolates and a bunch of flowers. In fact, surely, if the worst thing in the world is getting clamped, then the second worst must be having the clampers know where you live. Therefore, James refused to give his address, and Butcher continued to ask for it. "Company policy," was Butcher's only explanation. "Company policy. Company policy." Incredible. He'd managed a 3-syllable word. 2 of them, in fact. And this argument lasted 10 minutes before Butcher raised the stakes and sent down 2 Russian heavies to talk things over at the scene. Sure enough, these 2 trench-coated comrades came gliding up the pavement, basically Moscow's answer to the craze. These huge, leather-clad brutes, who looked like they only smile at funerals, walked shoulder to shoulder towards James. It was impossible to see where one monster ended and the other began. Maybe they were just one being, a kind of Siamese hitman created in a petri dish deep within the Kremlin. The negotiations didn't start well for James. True to their freakish appearance, the Russians spoke in a chilling form of broken English, finishing off each other's sentences like members of a terrifying Eastern Bloc improv group. One handled verbs, the other was in charge of adjectives. Nouns, when needed, were substituted by grunts, gestures, or pointing. James was adamant that they should remove the clamp as he'd offered to pay. The Russians explained that it was not as easy as that because a tow truck had been allocated and the fee was now £250. How had it gone up so quickly? Asked James. Company policy, said the one with the nouns. Company policy? Talk about pulling figures out of the air. £250? I mean, it might cost £250 to allocate an air ambulance, but a tow truck? James pointed out that even if it did cost that much, the tow truck wasn't even there. Wait a minute, said one of the Russians, detaching from his comrade and walking back around the corner. Conversation at this point became strained, as the remaining Russian was the one with the adjectives. Finally, the other heavy returned, this time driving the tow truck. James reasserted that he would happily pay the £60 fine, but he wasn't going to pay £250 for the totally pointless mobilisation of a bloody tow truck. So, a Cold War standoff ensued, with the Russians sat in their vehicle representing the whole of the USSR, and James sat in his car representing plucky West Berlin. Eventually, 2 police officers arrived on the scene. They listened to both sides of the story, and incredibly, they sided with the clampers. The policeman rocked on his toes and said, "In my opinion, he's got you banged to rights, and if I were you, I'd pay this straight away." James risked being arrested if he didn't allow the clampers to do their job. The police basically said, "It's up to you. We can arrest you and put you in front of a magistrate's court, or you can pay the clampers and then try and get your money back through a civil court. Pick your court." Who knew that clamping had resulted in such increased consumer choice? Would Sir care for this rock or this hard place? James was now left with no option but to pay Butcher the full amount, £250 up front, as ordered by the 2 intimidating thugs. And the Russians. Unsurprisingly, James didn't have the cash on him. He'd spent the last of his money at the cinema on a vat full of popcorn. So instead, he tried to pay Butcher by credit card. But amazingly, yet also unsurprisingly, Butcher was a bankrupt and so was unable to accept credit cards. The only way James could now settle his miserable debt was by using PayPal. PayPal? As if he'd successfully bid for a sinister clamping experience on eBay. So, a few weeks later, James tried to reclaim his money and took the matter to the small claims court. His defence being the sign was obscured by the overgrown bush and the fact that he'd agreed to pay the release fee, just not give his address. And what defence did Butcher, the legal genius, use? Company policy. Company policy. Fortunately for James, this time the authorities were looking for a bit more than 2 grunted words by way of an explanation, and so declared that James had in fact been forced to pay under duress. James had won. Butcher was ordered to pay back the £250 plus costs, meaning that James was now owed £400. Success! So to recover the funds, the court tried to contact Butcher, but he had hidden himself behind a veritable matrix of company names and P.O. boxes. Quite an achievement for a man so obese he would show up on Google Earth. So, instead, it was left up to James to track down the fat-shaved monkey and serve him the court papers personally. The online community flocked behind our hero, and the manhunt began. The question was, where was Butcher hiding? No stone was left unturned, as up and down the country, James staked out every kebab house, every burger van, and every fish and chip shop. Every avenue explored, but nothing, no sign of the conniving clamper. And then a breakthrough was made. A phone number and address was discovered, putting James within touching distance of his flabby foe. He could sense revenge, he could taste victory, he could smell chip fat. But in order to serve the papers, James needed to subtly get Butcher to confirm who he was and where he lived. This could be tricky. Butcher knew people were after him, and he was also very good at disappearing. So James knew that when he got him on the phone, he was going to have to linguistically snare his prey, using all the stealth and cunning of a chess grand master.
Hello?
Hello, is that Mr. Butcher of 63 Chatterton Road?
Yeah.
amazing piece of intellectual outmanoeuvring. So, James had Butcher's address, and all he now needed was proof that he'd given him the papers. So, accompanied by his camera-wielding girlfriend, they parked up outside the Lion's Den at 3 p.m. There was a mattress on the front lawn. This was certainly not a private road. James tried to sneak a peek, but the front window was obscured by a large overgrown bush. Typical. So he tiptoed round the side and looked in. And there he was, Butcher, sat alone, wearing only a pair of off-white Y-fronts and making a two-man red leather sofa look like an armchair. Now they had to deal with the task of physically handing him the court papers. One way they considered was to tempt him out, using a fishing rod to lower down a sausage roll. But before they could do anything, the front door swung open and out staggered Butcher, now thankfully fully dressed. This was James's chance. As his girlfriend moved in position to get the legally binding photo, Butcher huffed his colossal body over to his 4x4 and squeezed in. James ran over and tapped on the window. Butcher looked at him, then flashed the headlights and turned on the windscreen wipers before remembering how to open the window. James spiralled the papers onto the empty passenger seat as his girlfriend snapped away eagerly. "Who are you?" asked Butcher. "I'm the guy you screwed a load of money out of," said James. "Which one?" "I'm James, the guy who beat you in court. And these are the papers, explaining how you owe me £400. "What? £400? Screamed Butcher. "You only paid me £250. How could you have got that so quickly?" "Company policy," replied James. Meanwhile, Butcher's wife was in the kitchen, presumably sterilising her husband's drinking bottles, and was alerted to the commotion. She came outside, along with the heir to the wheel-clamping throne, Butcher's 8-year-old daughter. "Call the police!" he shouted to his wife. "This bastard is harassing us, and he's taking photos! Taking photos of a minor!" James's girlfriend was indeed snapping the whole scene, which now included the wife and daughter. Butcher then got James in a headlock and threw him to the ground. "Are you getting this, love?" James gurgled to his girlfriend as Butcher placed his entire weight on James's chest. A bit like those bed adverts where the bird sits on the hippo, but the other way around. Eventually, the police got there. They separated the grappling pair and, in true Bobby on the Beach style, asked, "What's going on here, then?" James spoke first, explaining that Butcher owed him £400 and that he was serving him the court papers. The policeman leafed through the document and then turned to Butcher. Rocking on his toes, the policeman said, "In my opinion, he's got you bang to rights. And if I were you, I'd pay this straight away." The Denver boot was now on the other foot. Butcher, now beginning to resemble his own red leather sofa, flew into the 5 stages of grief, focusing mainly on anger, not having the emotional intelligence for the other 4. Clutching at straws, he was desperate to try and pin something on James. "We'll check his camera," he said. "He's been taking photos of a minor. He's a paedophile." The policeman duly looked through the photos and then turned back to Butcher. "Firstly," he said, "it's hard to say that James took these photos at all, because he's in all of them." God bless the deductive powers of the British Bobby. "Secondly, despite what you may have read, it is not illegal to take photos of a minor. And finally, even if it was, there are no minors in these photos. I mean, I can see you, I can see your wife, I can see James, but I can't see a child." "But she's right there," shouted Butcher, "next to my wife." "Well, you can take a look if you like, sir, but from what I can see, it appears your daughter is obscured. She's completely hidden by that large, unkempt and overgrown bush." So you see, Sir Philip, if you still are the Minister for Transport, something has to happen. It's not fair for clampers and traffic wardens to charge such extortionate fees for such trivial offences. I mean, 2 inches. It was just 2 inches. And you can't empower these meatheads and then just let them run away from justice. People are getting sick of it. We will rise up. We will write pointless letters. And we will grapple with wheel clampers amid the unkempt bushes of this green and pleasant land. So please, Sir Philip, do something. Otherwise, I will set my granny on you. Yours sincerely, Tom Wrigglesworth, Mirth Engineer.
That was Tom Wrigglesworth's Open Letters. It was written and performed by Tom Wrigglesworth, with additional parts played by Joanna Munro. Additional material was provided by James Kettle and Miles Jupp. The producer was Simon Mayhew Archer.